Even in the most healthy romantic relationships, conflict is inevitable. Some argue that conflict will hinder a relationship and ultimately lead to the demise of the relationship. Others will say that conflict helps flourish the relationship between two people. The reality is that no matter the stage of the relationship or whether the relationship is healthy or not, conflict will always arise for numerous reasons. What determines if the relationship will be successful in the end is how the two people work through their differences. In order for romantic partners to build a successful and healthy relationship, it is key to acknowledge differences in opinion and work through those issues in a healthy way. If your partner does not know you have an issue, how will they know it's important to change their behavior? Avoiding conflict is not the recipe for romantic bliss. Knowing how to communicate through conflict with a partner is an important skill because poor communication skills, disagreements, and misunderstandings can be a source of anger and distance, or a springboard to a stronger relationship and happier future. In this documentary, we explore why communicating conflict is difficult, how partners can effectively communicate differences, the role forgiveness plays in resolving conflict, and various behaviors that should be avoided.
Well, I learn every day that I'm not a good listener. I talk too much sometimes. I can be annoying.
Yeah, I'd say that Zach is an outgoing person and I am opposite. And so we get into conflicts about what we want to do that night or that weekend. And it typically lands on what he wants to do. And so that kind of plays into the not listening.
I don't make decisions enough. That's not another one.
He's indecisive, but I want him to be decisive so that...
Or if I don't respond in 2 minutes, that's pretty bad. Sometimes I can take a while. But the other times, if I reply in 5 minutes, I've committed felonies.
We never go to bed mad at each other.
Oh yeah.
We never go to bed mad.
Tell him what to do and he does it.
And then when I've heard enough, I go downstairs and watch TV.
Conflict is difficult because it brings up issues that are not easy to talk about. Couples often don't want to face difficult realities of their relationship, but avoiding the discussion leads to assumptions being made and will hurt the relationship in the long run.
Conflict often arises when there's hurt, misunderstanding. When I work with couples, what gets in the way of communication in romantic relationships is basically past hurts. For a lot of couples, vulnerability is very difficult. Once they feel hurt or betrayed by their partner may not even realize this. Relationships are like gardens. You can plant this beautiful, sprawling, thriving garden, but if you don't tend to it, very quickly it's going to become overrun with weeds and bugs and all those things. So I really encourage couples to treat it almost like a living organism that if you put it to the side and don't pay any attention to it, it's going to suffer.
Well, I know communication is important, but it's not always easy, so I have to force myself that when some things bother me to say it to my spouse and make sure that I get everything that I'm feeling off my chest.
Listen, men, listen. Listen. Admit you're wrong when you're not wrong. Sometimes you just gotta take a punch just to do it. In the end, it'll be worth it.
We talk it out, and it could take a while, but normally we just try and compromise on what we're mad about, or whoever is mad, and then just talk it out, just try and find an agreement.
I think it's always best to try and have face-to-face conversations so that you can sort of pick up on the nonverbal cues and that type of thing. I'd say Monique is nonverbal, and it's kind of easier to figure out the responses if you're able to have a face-to-face conversation.
Can't see the eye rolls if I'm not sitting there.
That's right.
Can't hear the sarcasm if I'm not in the same room.
In 2015, Stern and DeVercha wrote in their popular press article, "Empathy involves not just feelings but thoughts, and it encompasses two people, the person we are feeling for and our own self."
It's not agreement. That's what I always tell couples. It's not agreement. It's not that I did this and I agree that it had this effect on you. It's understanding or kind of walking in your partner's shoes. So I think empathy is really big, to understand your partner's worldview.
As stated in Conflict in Adult Close Relationships, an Attachment Perspective, published in 2004, communication is seen as a vehicle for fostering intimacy and trust in relationships due to partners feeling understood and accepted.
Communicate. Don't let it fester up, inside you, and actually talk about things. Doesn't have to be any sit-down, fancy, programmatic things, but just talk, communicate.
So we sort of had to figure out, I guess, who was going to do what role.
Yeah. But we were good about dividing up jobs and responsibilities and decision-making things. I don't remember ever really sitting down and saying, you would do one thing and I would do something else. It just kind of evolved into that. And that worked out well.
De-escalation techniques are a variety of behaviors which enable an individual to downregulate their emotions when upset or angry. These verbal or nonverbal skills are crucial to relationships because it leads to a solution in a conflict situation.
I have to wait until I'm not so angry at the moment. That's what I do. I have to come back to it later, because if I say it while I'm angry, I'm going to say some really mean things.
In the field kind of where I think the research is kind of the most current is some mindfulness techniques, teaching things like deep breathing to lower, the physiological reaction. Some are as simple as distraction, exercise, things like that. And it's working with the individual to find out what specifically works for them. For example, if you go run a mile and you feel more agitated or escalated, that would not be a good technique for you.
If we have an argument and I did it the wrong way, I gotta have those self-talks where, okay, this is the moment where you gotta know what we talked about, like talking to myself, because there is times where I've messed up and I've regretted it, and so I strive for the next time. I remember those situations when we get into another argument. I remember that, and then I'm like, okay, now I gotta be positive.
Couples have different types of learned languages when communicating love. Gary Chapman discusses 5 languages of love: words of affirmation, quality time, receiving gifts, acts of service, and physical touch. It's important to know your partner's language in order to communicate effectively and prevent misunderstanding and unnecessary conflict.
Yeah, Zach tells me he loves me. I'm definitely words of affirmation, so he's always reassuring me that he loves me, our relationship is good, he's not cheating on me with his classmate.
I ask them to have enough insight to know when they're being triggered, and work to manage conflict in what we would call like the rational brain or the logical brain, so that they're not responding necessarily to past things, but they're able to calm their physiology down in a way that they can talk about what's going on in the present.
Forgiveness. It's one of the hardest and I think most important things that we can do both for ourselves and for our relationships. It's also something that is often misunderstood. Forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is not just sucking it up, putting on a happy face, being nice or whatever. Forgiveness is not the same thing as reconciliation. Forgiveness does not mean necessarily that a relationship is restored. Forgiveness is a prerequisite for restoration, for reconciliation of relationship, but restoration, reconciliation is actually a separate thing. Kind of in contrast to a lot of the mistaken thoughts about forgiveness, we need to be able to remember. We need to remember what happened, what we experienced.
When you go to forgive your spouse or you want to be forgiven, you really have to make sure that your spouse knows that you are truly sorry, because sorry is a word that's thrown around. So you want to make sure that they know, and that you want to make sure you know that they are truly sorry.
Yeah, if you're that mad, you just have to give it time and then realize it's not worth staying mad about.
You just have to forgive. It's a part of what it is. I mean, you should not let things keep going and going. Just forgive, because usually by the time you figure it out, it wasn't that big a deal anyway.
According to relationship expert John Gottman, there are 4 behaviors that partners should avoid when engaging in conflict. He refers to them as the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. The 4 behaviors are criticizing your partner, attacking your partner's sense of self, playing the victim, and withdrawing from the conflict altogether. It's important to learn how to minimize these behaviors in order to successfully navigate through conflict situations.
Fred Gottman used it sometimes to identify the horsemen of the apocalypse, I guess as you would say. So I'm making couples aware that when they're defensive and when they're angry, some of those horsemen can enter into the room, and challenging that or stopping that process if somebody is being overly critical of their partner. If you're coming at it, if you're coming at a piece of work from a defensive stance, you're still in the mindset of, you did this to me and I need to defend myself.
I know I still do it now, but more so in the beginning. When I'd get mad at him for something, I would play out the argument in my head, because I felt like I knew him well enough that I could anticipate what his response would be to anything I said. So I would play out the argument and then let him know later whether he won the fight or whether I won the fight. Typically he won the fight. And sometimes it took me a day or so to figure out who won it.
I wouldn't agree about blowing over though.
Oh, I mean, it blows over for the moment, but it'll come back like 12 hours later out of the blue. So it just kind of depends on the situation and how certain people are feeling certain days.
A lot of always and never statements, because somebody is never always or never anything.
You shouldn't call each other names. It's not a good idea, because usually you'll say things that you don't mean and you'll regret later, because she'll bring it back up 5 years later.
Here we go.
Women can calm down more and communicate their feelings rather than blowing things out of proportion. Is that good?
Yes, don't blow things out of proportion. Don't assume, because you know what they say about assuming.
I guess try not to make it personal. You know, if you're sort of evaluating a situation, try to keep it focused on what the different options are and what the advantages are or the disadvantages of the different options, and try not to really bring in the personal aspect of it too much.
One of the things that I do work on with couples is escalating the way they communicate. A lot of times we find that it'll go from an issue at hand, you know, who is going to do the dishes, to escalating to making it be about that person, like, well, you're always lazy and I can never count on you. And then the third level of escalation is making it about the relationship. So not only are you lazy and you can never follow through on anything, but now we probably shouldn't be together because this will never change. For me, I try and help couples to keep it focused on, if we're talking about the dishes, let's talk about the dishes. And then past that, is it really about the dishes? Or is it about the fact that I feel like I can't count on you, or I feel like you've let me down?
Relationships are difficult, and arguments, disagreements, and other forms of conflict will always arise. However, in a healthy relationship, partners are able to prevent, minimize, and end conflict before it becomes something that will seriously impact the relationship. By using the skills we discussed in this documentary, relational partners can maintain a healthy and strong relationship and focus on relational growth as opposed to constantly mending hurt feelings and personal rifts. According to Haas and Stafford in their 2005 article, relationship maintenance refers to using positive communicative strategies and behaviors to prevent relationship dissolution through their partner's efforts to sustain a dynamic equilibrium in their relationship. Without effective and positive communication, any relationship will encounter crippling conflict. By instituting positive communicative behaviors, such as compromising, listening to your partner, and being able to forgive when you are hurt or let down, one is able to foster a happy and long-lasting relationship.
You know, this is where I tell couples a lot of times, we shouldn't watch Cinderella as kids, because couples go off into the sunset and they're supposed to live happily ever after. But happily ever after takes work. So I think the myth kind of in our culture is the happily ever after piece. That if you want to incorporate things into your relationship, it takes work. It's not going to happen by itself. It's not magical.
Too many people let little things get to them, and you really shouldn't. I mean, the least amount of things that you can let bother you, the better off you'll be.
As much as I love him, he is literally the most annoying person I've ever met in my life. But yet, we've still been together for almost 3 years. But again, every day is different. You never know what's going to happen.
There's no secret. You just gotta not give up and not quit. If you love each other enough, it'll last.
Cheers, babe.
Wait, I didn't get the cheers part. Cheers.